better, is what I feel. Many times when you try to take the best of both worlds, you sometimes take a mix of both words. Only the wordings, you just draw some of them here and there, like Arvind was referring in the morning, you do some cut and paste into it. But anyhow, a baby step has been taken, is what I would say on this Companies Act and the entire effort of this Companies Act 2013. And yesterday it was also spoken about globalization versus liberalization. Are we trying to globalize too much, forgetting the liberalization? I would say they need not contradict each other. You can globalize, at the same time you can get liberalized also. I think there's a fine balance between globalization and liberalization. If it is achieved by these laws, then we would have achieved its purpose. With this, on the new concepts, I would want to, before I leave it to the speaker, I want to touch on 2-3 concepts which I have seen are the maximum discussed and debated. I would leave it even to the audience to guess which is the most discussed new concept under this Companies Act 2013. Any guess? It is the CSR. Somebody rightly said it is the CSR. Corporate social responsibility is the most discussed, debated topic or a new concept under this Companies Act, because it's a global forerunner. Not any country, I understand, have a specific mandatory regulation requiring people to spend on CSR activities, which has come almost for the first time in this country. Normally they say government should govern and business houses should do businesses. But in our country, like in many other countries, government has always been into business. And government tries to get out of some of the business, but at the same time in different models like PPP or BOT, government seems to be getting through the back door into many other businesses also. So we know that government does business. Now what the government wants is, the government wants business houses to do governance also, to work for the welfare of the people directly, though they've been working indirectly. Now it is mandated for these companies to work directly to the welfare of the people. So CSR is the one prime major new concept which has come into being because of the Companies Act 2013. Of course, there are a lot of interpretations on its measurability, applicability, eligibility of expenses. We would see all these in more detail when we discuss about that. The second most important concept which has come in, which again I understand is one of the global first, is women being on board a specified class of companies. This again is being discussed, debated in a number of countries, especially in the Europe, but which has not come as a legislation so far. There are a lot of interpretations being provided. But India had taken a prime position, bringing women to the forefront. And in a country where we are trying to give them a 33% reservation in our political system, which is taking quite a long time, which is not still seen the light of the day, I think the Companies Act 2013 has taken one big step by providing this as a mandatory provision. Let us see how it works, and I only hope that there is more of substance which is added, substance, variety, and quite a lot of things added to our boards by really well qualified and upright professional directors who are going to be on boards. The third concept which I want to briefly touch upon is regarding independent directors. They have always been around. There have been other legislation which I have been mentioning about independent directors, but this is the first time when there is a definition, there is a code prescribed for them, there are qualifications prescribed for them, a lot of regulations which have been brought around the functioning of directors. Independent directors have their own meetings, independent directors to be part of CSR committees, quite a lot of regulations which have come in. See, many refer to independent directors these days as IDs. Independent directors. I think soon they would become, probably they function extremely well. The way it is envisaged by this act, they would really become identifications for corporates. Hey, this board consists of these people. That could be an identification. Second thing is, again, based on the recent past activities in the recent past, people have come to a stage, all the stakeholders have come to be dependent on the independence, real independence of the independent directors. There are quite a lot of things there are a lot of responsibilities which have been cast on the independent directors as well as on other directors via this Companies Act 2013. Let's look into all these things in detail. And in any session like this, most of the work is done if you have a good speaker. The chairman's work is just to sit and doze off. In that, I've been very lucky. I think you would have heard about Ms. Chiramar's qualifications and their experience. And she's how many of the people here are company secretaries or students of ACS? I guess quite a bit of a population would have been there. And she's a company secretary, and we're going to hear from the horse's mouth. Because I always envy company secretaries. We look into Companies Act as one of our things, but whereas they go through into it 365 days, look into rules, look into forms, interpret every word, every letter is possible. And it's going to be very good to hear from her about all these very detailed topics in a very detailed manner. With this, I leave it, I join you in trying to listen to her and then get benefited. Thank you.
Of the dais, fellow professionals, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, Sri Dhanya Corporate Knowledge Care Private Limited, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to stand before an august gathering like you all and to share my limited thoughts on some of the important provisions of the new Companies Act of 2013. CA Gopalakrishna Raju and CA Mohan Ramakrishnan has set very, very high standards for me. I just hope I can live up to the expectations you all have cast upon me, and I can deliver to the best of my knowledge. Without much further ado, we'll start with the presentation. The flow of my presentation, I have divided it into two parts. In the first part, we'll look at some of the important new concepts which have been introduced by means of the new Companies Act of 2013. And in the second section, we will just try to compare the Companies Act of 1956 and the Companies Act of 2013 to understand what are the emerging new changes which have been thrown before us and the challenges which they bring with it. To move with the new concepts, one-person company. Right since yesterday, we've heard a lot of speakers mention about this concept of one-person company. We all know in the year 2009, the Limited Liability Partnership Act was introduced in India. And by means of that act, the concept of limited liability was introduced for the partnership form of a business organization. Now, by means of this one-person company, the same benefit or the same concept of limited liability is sought to be extended to a sole proprietary form of business also. We all know in India, the major chunk of business is still carried on in the form of a sole proprietary form of business only. However, this sector largely has remained unregulated so far. So by giving this kind of a provision under the Companies Act, where a single person can form a company with the limited liability, the government has tried to bring this sector also under some sort of a regulation. Before I say more about a one-person company, I would just want to make one point clear that the Act provides for certain privileges, certain exemptions, certain special requirements pertaining to a one-person company. But apart from that, if nothing has been specified specifically in the Act, all other provisions which are applicable to any other private company under the Act, it would apply in the same manner to a one-person company also. For all other purposes, it is just like any other ordinary one-person company. A one-person company, as the name itself suggests, is a company which will have only one member. Now, to ensure a perpetual succession, a provision has been made where the name of the nominee has to be mentioned at the time of the incorporation itself, so that in the event of sudden death or incapacity to contract of the member, the nominee can take over and the perpetuity of business is maintained. Some of the important features about this one-person company are, as I was telling you, there will be only one member. There cannot be any scenario in which a one-person company will have more than a member. It can, at any point of time, it can have only one member. As regards number of directors are concerned, it has an option where it can have a single director, but it can also have multiple directors, which is the same way applicable to a private company, a maximum number of 15 directors, and even more than 15 can be appointed by passing a special resolution. But the privilege is there, a one-person company can still operate with a single director, which is not available to any other private company. Now, in order to ensure that any person who is dealing with this one-person company is able to identify the company as such, the provision has been made that wherever the name of the company is mentioned, below that name in the brackets, the words one-person company has to be specified so that any person dealing with the company is able to identify he's dealing with a one-person company. Before the rules had come in, there was a slight confusion as to whether a company or a body corporate can incorporate a one-person company. Even though by reading the act, we could get an idea that the intent of legislature was not that. The legislature always intended only a natural person to incorporate a one-person company, but it was not very clearly laid out in the act. This clarity has been brought in the rules now. It has been clearly laid out that the member as well as the nominee should be natural persons, they should be resident in India, and they should be Indian citizens. This is a very important provision, and a foreign citizen or an Indian citizen, even resident outside India, will not be permitted to form a one-person company in India. As CA Gopalakrishna Raju was mentioning, a limit has also been put on the number of OPCs a person can incorporate, and it has been fixed as 5. A person at one point of time, he can be a member of only maximum of 5 one-person companies. Of course, he can be a nominee in any number of companies, but as a member, he should not exceed more than 5 companies. The rules have also brought in provisions regarding automatic conversion of a OPC into a private company or a public company. Mark my word, automatic here. Here we are not talking when the company itself is voluntarily going and converting itself to a private or public. Here, based on some threshold limits, that is, if the one-person company's paid up capital exceeds 50 lakh rupees or its turnover exceeds 2 crore rupees. Later in the presentation, we will see that these threshold limits are the same which are applicable for a small company. So if these threshold limits are breached, then a one-person company is mandated by law to convert itself into a private or public company within a time period of 6 months. Probably the intention of legislature is to ensure that a OPC stays within the limit of a small company. Now, having come out with such a novel idea of a single person company and then diluting it by imposing these limits, I don't know how far this concept is really going to catch on with the economy, because now in the current scenario, to have 2 crores of turnover, I mean, this is really, it's a very minuscule amount to have a turnover of 2 crores, and then there is a mandation to convert into a private or public company. So will the benefit will really reach the economy or not? Lot needs to be seen on that. What are the special requirements or privileges which are granted to a one-person company? As I was mentioning you, whatever is stated, only these special privileges are available. Apart from these, all other provisions will apply as applicable to a private limited companies. So incorporation and nomination, we have already seen that the process of incorporation will be more or less same as that of a private company. Only thing, a nomination requirement is there to ensure perpetuity of succession of business. Annual return, my colleagues from the company secretary profession, they must be aware regarding this annual return requirements. A lot of debate has been happening in the institute on this, because now the requirement of a compliance certificate has been taken off, and instead of that, a certification of annual return was brought in, wherein the annual return has to be certified by a practicing company secretary in case the company does not have a company secretary. However, for a one-person company, this requirement is not there. A one-person company's annual return can be signed by either the company secretary of the company. If there is no company secretary, a single director alone can sign the annual return, and there is no requirement for an outside certification from a PCS. Financial statements also, we have been seeing yesterday what are all the components of the new financial statement. So there should be a balance sheet, there should be a statement of profit and loss, a cash flow statement, a statement of changes in equity, and notes. But for a one-person company, exemption regarding cash flow statement has been given, where a one-person company need not to have cash flow statement as part of its financial statements. Number of directors I've already touched upon. It can have a single director, maximum can go up to 15, beyond 15 with special resolution. General meetings, obviously the impossibility, it will not arise the situation of general meeting. At least 2 people are required for a meeting of minds. So the requirement of general meetings and all provisions relating to general meetings will not be applicable to a one-person company. So it is sufficient as long as the resolutions which are required to be passed by means of a general meeting, they are recorded in the minutes book, it will be deemed to be proper and valid in the eyes of law. any other private company, we need to conduct 4 board meetings. For a OPC, it is sufficient if 2 board meetings are conducted in each financial year, that is in each half of the calendar year. In the first 6 months, in the next 6 months, a board meeting is conducted, then it's sufficient for a OPC if just 2 meetings are there in a year. One thing needs to be ensured here is at least a minimum time gap of 90 days must be there between both the board meetings. If that is ensured, it is sufficient, and 4 board meetings requirement is not there. Just before, Bhavani ma'am and Shri Priya ma'am, they were discussing about the term of the auditor, and I can see a lot of resentment among the auditors regarding this rotation. So one saving grace here is for a 1-person company, this rotation of auditor, the maximum tenure of auditor being 5 years or 10 years, it will not be applicable. For a 1-person company, the auditor can continue forever, and there is no requirement of a cooling off period or a mandatory rotation. Contract by a OPC, since again there is a single member, any contract, it has to be reduced in writing or it has to be recorded in the minutes book. These were some of the important provisions regarding a 1-person company, and mandatory conversion of OPC. I have already told you, when the threshold limit of a small company is breached, OPC has to mandatorily convert itself into a private company or a public company.